Welcome into Sportsmemo's betting podcast for May 9th. It is Thursday. We got Rob Veno on, and we're previewing college football, the SEC Western Division. Robbie, welcome into the podcast. How are you?
I am good today, Drew. How about yourself?
I'm doing good, man. Anytime we're talking college football, kind of gets me a little excited, and excited to get your opinions here on all of the SEC West. Who you think's going to win? Who might take a step back? And we'll do each team in order of alphabetical order, actually. So we're not favoring any one team over the other. But let's start off at the top here. We got Alabama, Robbie. Finished last year 14-1, 9-0 in conference. And, of course, the one loss coming in the national championship game to Clemson. Overall, just finished 8-7 ATS, though, against the spread. If you bet on Alabama every game, you only finished 8-7. It's something with Nick Saban, Robbie. You know, he doesn't really pound his opponent into the ground when he's got him down. He just kind of, is cool running out the clock, and we've noticed that in years past, so nothing too surprising there. And an over-under record, depending what number you got, of course, I'm reading 9-5-1 here towards the over, so way more overs for Nick Saban in Alabama than we're used to. But either way, 14-1, and obviously the Alabama Crimson Tide have put themselves in a position recruiting-wise, just wins in the pass-wise, as far as they're reloading. They're one of the top teams in the country. There's no doubt, Robbie, likely a playoff team again. But overall, what is your betting preview of the Alabama Crimson Tide this upcoming year?
Yeah, let's just finish off what you started there with ATS records, Drew, because there's a real disparity between Alabama overall and then Alabama first half and Alabama second half. If you were somebody who went out last year and just bet Alabama first half, you wind up 11-4 against the spread, because we remember how they just dominated up until halftime. And as you mentioned, let off the gas pedal in the second half. Second half betting with Alabama last year, they're only 5-10. So, it could be the same story here, Drew, because the offense is absolutely loaded, just the same as it was last year. Obviously, everybody knows the quarterback situation with Tua Tagovailoa, and then you throw in these wide receivers that they have, and you could argue that Alabama has the best wide receiving core in the country. I'm not saying there's a right or wrong answer, but you can make a legitimate argument that when you have Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs, Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, you may have the best wide receiver core in the country. Obviously, the backfield, good once again. Najee Harris likely to be the heir apparent to the starting running back position. But, they actually bring in a freshman by the name of Trey Sanders, who immediately proclaimed that he's going to win the Heisman Trophy as a freshman. So it just goes to show you the talent level that Alabama has on the offensive side. The offensive line, when you're nitpicking Alabama, you might find Alabama fans who think that the offensive line is a little bit of a concern. Of course, Jonah Williams off to the NFL draft, their star tackle last year. They also lose their starting center, but, they fill in the pieces so well. The point is that Alabama may be a great first half bet once again this season, a team that can run it up early, take it easy later on in the game. They're going to be under the direction offensively of Steve Sarkisian. It seems like Alabama's replacing coordinators each and every year. This year they don't have to replace both, but Sarkisian does come back. He had a short stint in the NFL with the Atlanta Falcons. Now he's back with Alabama. You won't see any changes in the offense. And remember, Sarkisian play called for the national championship game a couple of years ago when Lane Kiffin was when he left Alabama. So he's not new to this environment. Obviously, Nick Saban brought him back for a reason. Same offense, same exact play calling, same system. I don't see where teams are going to have any easier of a time this season stopping Alabama offensively than they did last season. Defensively, of course, when you lose 10 players to the draft, you're going to lose a lot of good players, Quinnen Williams being the top of their defenders. But, a pretty close examination, Drew, would have some believe that they're not going to be much different defensively either. The only question mark I could find was they feel like their edge rushers might not be up to Alabama standards, which means they'll get a couple less sacks. Good team, overpriced team. Maybe the first half is the way to go. Maybe first half overs are the way to go. I think everything that we saw out of Alabama last year probably pertains to this year. As you said, a legitimate threat for the national title once again.
Yeah, and Robbie, you bring up, the defensive ends maybe not being up to Alabama's standards of pass. That can be alarming, if you're not putting pressure on the opposing team's quarterback. That's one of the most important aspects in the game of football, college football especially, in my opinion. So that could be worrisome. And also you brought up the fact of what they lost 10 players to the draft. Is that the stat?
10 players to the draft, yeah.
It almost in what is that number in comparison to other teams?
Well, if you just want to go through the SEC, the next closest team with players lost to the draft, there was a tie. Texas A&M and Georgia both lost 7. You drop down to 6. Auburn and Ole Miss both lost 6. And then from there it decreases. But 10, they're always the leader in players lost to the draft. And, when it's 10 compared to 7, I'm going to say that that's significant. When you have 3 more draft choices than anybody else in your conference, that's pretty significant. In Alabama's case, 5 of those 10, half of those 10 went in the first 4 rounds, 6 of those 10 went in the first 4 rounds, the other 4 from round 5 through round 7.
Yeah, and Quentin Williams coming off the defensive line, and you already said, as far as the defensive ends maybe not being up to par with years past. So that defensive line might be susceptible this year, Robbie, huh?
I think that's the one thing that everything I've read through their spring that points to if there is a defensive weakness, it would be edge rushing. They do, however, feel they're significantly better on the corners. Remember that Clemson took them to task with deep passes in the national championship game, and Alabama had a couple injuries there. They're completely healthy, and the secondary looks like a strength. So can the secondary hold up that extra couple of ticks, maybe if the D-line doesn't get there? Quentin Williams, you bring him up, Drew, and he was their best pass rusher up the middle, not exactly off the edge. So they've got guys, let's face it, we're talking about guys that are 5-star recruits playing defensive end for this team, so we're not going to feel sorry for him. But again, when you nitpick Alabama and you look for something that might not be up to standards for them, it could be the pass rush off the edge. We'll see if they get creative defensively to create more of a pass rush. In that system, you can send disguised blitzes and whatnot. We'll see. But Alabama should be right there again. They'll head into the season as one of the 4 top power-rated teams in the nation. You'll pay a premium to bet them, and if need be, like last year, they'll try to outscore you because they certainly have the weapons to do that.
Yeah, great point as far as we're nitpicking here on Alabama, trying to find weaknesses. Obviously, it's tough to do with what Nick Saban has built there. But, Robbie, moving down the line here, we're going to preview all the teams in the SEC West. Next up, alphabetical order. Arkansas Razorbacks just 2-10 last year, and we just talked about Alabama 9-0 in conference, winning the SEC championship, and we're moving to Arkansas here, and they went 0-8 in conference, so winless in the SEC last year, seeing 5-6-1. Of course, depending on what numbers you've got, one game under 500 in terms of their against the spread record if you were betting Arkansas every game, and over under 5-7 with 7 unders, Robbie. So a little bit trending there towards the under. They found change, as far as a new system in Arkansas. Belima out and throwing it around a little bit more there. So it will be interesting in what, year 2 of the new regime, I believe, Robbie. But what are you seeing here with the Arkansas Razorbacks?
Yeah, the offense, Drew, is the direct or the common denominator to go along and correlate with those unders that they played. Arkansas was held to 23 points or less 7 times last year. Chad Morris, obviously. This was one of those complete and total overhauls. There were a couple of them in the SEC, but this one was one of the more dramatic because you have Chad Morris bringing his spread system in to replace Brett Bielema's prehistoric run the ball up the middle and, on 3rd and 6, try and complete a 6-yard pass. That style of offense was replaced. And, Arkansas just didn't have the components to fit that, to fit the new style. So Chad Morris, who through his short tenure so far, this only his second year as head coach, has done a fantastic job recruiting. I got a number here that they are the number 23 ranked recruiting class in the nation this year. And, 23 sounds terrific when there's 130 Division One teams, FBS teams across the nation. 23 sounds fantastic. It's like third lowest in the SEC because the entire top 25, except for Vanderbilt and Missouri, is basically SEC teams. But the point being that in the last when Brett Bielema got there in 2013, Drew, not 1 year did he have any more than 7 4-star recruits. And the talent, the speed, the lack of speed and the lack of talent showed up for Arkansas. His best year he had 7. Chad Morris brings in 11 this year, including 3 4-star wide receivers, which they're going to lean on immediately. One kid, you'll want to mark his name down if you're a college football fantasy player, by the name of Trey Knox, 6'5", 220, who already has everybody talking down in Fayetteville about the numbers he's going to put up for this team in this system. So, Arkansas's a team that had to tear it down to rebuild it. Offensively, you get a pair of transfer quarterbacks here. You'll know both names. Nick Starkel comes from Texas A&M as a transfer, and Ben Hicks comes from SMU, reunited with Chad Morris. Remember, Hicks was Chad Morris's quarterback over there, and right now he is the starter only because Starkel didn't show up or wasn't there for the spring. So Starkel will come this summer, and we'll see a little bit of a quarterback battle. But I do believe that the familiarity with the playbook favors Ben Hicks, and they'll probably start the season with him. We'll see if his play keeps him as the number 1 quarterback, or if Nick Starkel, who's got a pretty nice arm, can outplay him and take the job over. But those are 2 much better quarterbacks than what they were dealing with last year, and obviously Hicks fits the system far better than what Chad Morris had last season. Running backs seem to be really good. Rakeem Boyd, Devwa Whaley, who got hurt toward the end of last year. Boyd actually filled in. He wasn't the starter last year, but had a tremendous year. You can remember Rakeem Boyd. He was one of those kids, I think, at Independence Junior College in Kansas on the Netflix show Last Chance U. He was one of those kids, came to Arkansas, did really well last year. So they look to be better at the quarterback position, the running back position. We'll see how the young kids play wide receiver here in Morris's system. And, of course, the offensive line is always a question mark. For Arkansas fans, everything you go read, Drew, the defense way ahead of the offense. You're in the second year of 2 systems here, which is always should bring improvement. The offense should be better. It's going to have to be a lot better before they get really competitive in the SEC West. But on the defensive side, John Chavis, we know, has had some great defenses throughout his career. And right now, the defense looks like the anchor for this team. A lot of people pointing to the defensive line being the strength of that unit. So maybe the defense can hold things down so the offense can catch up. We get the great equalizer with a team like this, bottom echelon, SEC West. That equalizer is the point spread. And I guess, our job, obviously, to figure out if Arkansas will be undervalued by odds makers here. Maybe we can make some money with this team. I'd venture to say, I've got a little check mark next to him right now, but I'd venture to say that Arkansas might be a team that we want to get involved with this season as an underdog. Perhaps they'll be catching a few too many points. The improvement should be noticeable on both sides of the football. But like I say, the offensive side really has a ways to go. When you get held to 23 or less in 7 of 12 games, it's not good. Ben Hicks being there to QB with his familiarity of the playbook should help, and we'll see if the young receivers can get going right out of the chute. I don't think that would be the case, but they do start the season with Portland State, then they get Ole Miss, then they get Colorado State, then they get San Jose State. That's 4 games right there where they can mesh. They're not overwhelmed by the talent of any of those 4 teams. So, Arkansas, by the time they really hit a strong opponent, which is A&M, they could, they're a third of the way into the season, and they could be improved by that point too. So I think it's a team to look out for, Arkansas. Maybe situationally, we'll see how they go with totals, but perhaps under if the defense is the anchor for this team, might be a way to go as well.
Yeah, Robbie, great breakdown, man. And it sounds like that Ole Miss game in the first 4 games, that's going to be a key game for this team, huh?
Yeah, divisional game, right? Ole Miss on the same path that Arkansas is on, really, as far as rebuild is concerned. We'll get into them in a little bit as we work our way through the division. But, yeah, that will be an important game for them. In the non-conference games, the 3 out of the first 4, they're just not that overwhelming. 2 Mountain West teams and the FBS pass-happy Portland State team under the direction of Dan Hawkins. I think they got suspended. He was there 1 year. Or last year was his first year, Dan Hawkins, and I think Portland State found themselves in trouble already. I think maybe some recruiting violations or something. But that being said, Arkansas may have a chance, Drew, to learn on the fly, so to speak, through their first 4 games.
Yeah, great breakdown, Robbie. And guys, we're breaking down all the SEC West teams on this podcast. We broke down the SEC East teams last week, and going next week we'll be breaking down pretty much a division in college football every week until the college football season kicks off, and then of course during the season we do every game on the board, breaking down every game on the college football betting board from a Vegas perspective. But Robbie, let's move down the card here. There's 3 A teams. So the last one up is the Auburn Tigers. Went 8-5 last year, just 3-5 in conference, depending what numbers you were betting them, of course. Against the spread, finished 6-7 under 500 there if you were betting Auburn every game. And over-unders, 5-8, a big under-trender here for Auburn. Don't always see that with Gus Malzahn, but this year should be interesting with Auburn. I know they start off here with the Oregon Ducks in Texas, I believe in Arlington, so the house that Jerry built. That will be an interesting game. And just a little side note here, if you're looking to bet that game early for traveling purposes, there is a kind of a little tidbit here with how Auburn travels. If it's not a national championship game, Robbie, the fan base doesn't travel very well to the west. They always travel very well east, so like Atlanta to Florida, any bowl games like that. Auburn travels very well out to Texas. Not so much. Unless it's a national championship game, the fan base doesn't really go west as well, but just thought I'd throw that out there. How are you looking to bet the Auburn Tigers this year, Robbie?
Yeah, so maybe Phil Knight can dig into his checkbook and load the stands with Oregon fans in Jerry World on that particular night. Hey, the opening schedule for Auburn, and they're one of the few teams, I think they might be the only team, Drew, that plays 6 consecutive weeks without a bye. So Ole Miss is the other team. Ole Miss actually plays a couple extra. They play 8 consecutive weeks without a bye. So the schedule is tough right out of the chute, because not only do they play 6 consecutive weeks, but 4 of the opponents are worthy opponents. You just mentioned Oregon on a neutral field. Oregon thought widely to be a top 15 team this year. Texas A&M inside the division is a tough matchup in College Station. Mississippi State at home will be a tough game. And, of course, Florida in Gainesville will be a tough game. So 4 of their first 6 really tough for Auburn. And like I say, with no open week inside those first 6 games, I know you shouldn't be tired to start the season, but it's a lot of big games heaped on top of one another. We'll see how Auburn fares there. But there's some things to talk about here, and it starts in Auburn with the quarterback battle that's going on right now between Joey Gatewood and true freshman Bo Nix. Gatewood, for those who don't know, is compared physically to Cam Newton, 6'6", 235, and much more of the type quarterback that Gus Malzahn features in his offense, where the mobility and the running game is concerned. So Gatewood has that advantage. Nix, obviously, extremely highly touted coming in here as a thrower. Auburn needs to improve that passing game. Let's face it, the last couple of years, that passing game has been dismal at best. Even with a drafted quarterback in Jarrett Stidham, their passing game never got untracked over the course of the last 2 seasons. So that's the big battle, the number one question. The second biggest thing going on with Auburn, in my estimation, is the fact that Gus Malzahn has taken play-calling duties back, and he's going to go back to his old ways. He is going to push tempo. I usually sort, because there's so many spread offenses nowadays, Drew, and everybody plays let's get to the line and, get the playoff quick. I kind of split it into up-tempo and extreme tempo. And Auburn under Malzahn, when they're doing what he wants to do, is extreme tempo. You don't have time to breathe. Now, a couple of quotes, and one that really, I think, tells you the direction that he's headed from the head coach himself. He said they're going to try as much as possible this year to keep the same 11 on the field offensively so that defenses cannot substitute. So he's not going to run guys in and out. He's trying to find a base unit, 11 players, and use them for a possession and see if they can't really wear down teams like you remember the Auburn Missouri SEC championship game a few years back where it just went back and forth until late third quarter. Missouri finally wilted and Auburn kept scoring touchdowns. So that's what they're trying to get back to here. Can it be accomplished? We'll see. We know that Gus Malzahn gave up play calling duties a couple of years back to Rhett Lashley. And then Lashley moved on to UConn after that season, but they weren't scoring points. He turned it over to Lashley. They wind up going on a pretty nice run all the way to the SEC championship game. Lashley, his play calling led to a couple of games where they really had scored a lot of points. For the most part, they did a little bit better offensively if you're just taking an overall view. But I like the idea of having Malzahn back. Now, he's hired a new offensive coordinator here by the name of Kenny Gillingham, and this is one of two guys that we'll talk about here in this division that are offensive coordinators, or this is a true offensive coordinator. The next one we'll talk about is kind of a co-offensive coordinator, but under the age of 30, Drew. Kenny Gillingham comes over from Memphis, where he learned under Mike Norvell. He was the quarterback coach there for Memphis and the offensive coordinator last couple of years, so anybody who knows what Memphis's offense did and how extreme tempo Memphis's offense was, the selection of this OC fits right in with what Auburn's going to do here. Again, Malzahn's the play caller. Dillingham is young, but certainly an innovative mind and one of the younger offensive coordinators that's on the fast track right now, as you can tell by having this position in the SEC. So we'll see. All of that being said, if it goes right for Auburn, they're going to be a handful on offense. Defensively, the last few years, they've had a real good defensive line. True again. Some people think they've got 2 first-rounders on that defensive front. The defense at all 3 levels, pretty good. And if the offense can score some points here, Drew, they might be I don't want to say they'll be back to, playoff contention, but maybe they will. I mean, a couple of years ago, like I just said, they made it all the way, really out of nowhere, to the SEC title game. Remember, it was that 3-game stretch where they had to beat, I think, Georgia, Alabama, Georgia again, and the third game they didn't win. But they've got some components here, and it really depends upon the offense and the passing game. Gillingham has brought over some of Norvell's passing principles inside the spread system to try and fit into Malzahn's offensive scheme. And if they can get that rolling, if Gatewood turns out to be the real deal, or if Nix turns out to be the real deal, might have to look out for Auburn here in the SEC West.
Yeah, and they got the potential to be pretty good, Robbie. You bring up the defensive line. I think Stidham leaving to the NFL, I know this sounds weird, a drafted quarterback, but I think it's a good thing for the offense. I don't think he was that good of a fit, in my personal opinion. A lot of people concentrate a lot on arm talent. Not that it's not important. It's just not the most important thing to a quarterback. I don't think he was a good fit. I'm not sure how successful he'll be in the NFL. But to bring in more of a mobile presence at the quarterback position, we've seen it multiple times with Gus Malzahn. And we talk Cam Newton. He was the offensive coordinator then, and what he was able to do with him. But obviously you're not going to have an athlete like Cam Newton at the quarterback position year in, year out. But even with Nick Marshall in 2013, what he was able to do with that mobility, and Nick Marshall was not very accurate. There was many passes throughout that year, that national championship run they made, where he was way off, Robbie, but he could move. I mean, he was an NFL athlete. I believe he spent multiple years on the Jacksonville Jaguars roster in the defensive backfield and special teams. So it just shows in this offense, the mobility at the quarterback position is very, very important. So, Auburn's an interesting team as well, talking Arkansas and Auburn Auburn. I think that these two teams especially have betting value, just because when you start talking change, it gets very difficult on the odds makers, Robbie, and I think there's value there for the sports bettors, especially early on in the season. And I'll tell you this, Robbie, looking at their schedule, you brought it up, great point. Oregon, Tulane, Kent State, Texas A&M, Mississippi State, at the Swamp against the Florida Gators in the first 6 weeks of the season. 4 of those games are against top 25 opponents. They could be 2-4 heading into the bye week, and one of the top 25 teams in the country talent-wise, Robbie.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it, Drew. And like you say, with odds makers, that may affect the prices that you get. They could go undervalued. I'm trying to remember the game. I think it was was it Florida State last year? One of these kickoff classic type games where they just got absolutely hammered, and I think we could see some flaws, and the numbers didn't really change on Florida State until midway through the season. So you can pick up some stuff here off of this initial game of the season for Auburn against Oregon. It's a good matchup, and we'll see how they look. We'll see if Oregon's defense can keep up, because we saw this in the national championship, right? Was that Nick Marshall's year when they won the No.
When they lost the national championship, it was Nick Marshall, the quarterback. They lost to Florida State in Los Angeles, and then the year that they won the national championship, Cam Newton was the quarterback, and they beat Oregon.
They beat Oregon, right? That's what I was trying to get to. They did beat Oregon, so we see these two, clash again. We'll see. Auburn's got the components. We'll see how the head coach brings them along here.
Robbie, great breakdown so far. We're almost halfway through here. We got Louisiana State, the LSU Tigers, the Bayou Bengals here, 10-3 last year in conference, 5-3, 7-6 betting wise. Against the spread record is 7-6, small gainers there, and over under 7-5-1 towards the over. Robbie, what are you seeing here with the Bayou Bengals?
Well, I think the biggest news with LSU, like it is every year, is that offense. For years now, it's been a quarterback problem. It's been a point production problem. They keep trying to fix it. This will be the third time in 3 years that they've changed their entire offensive scheme. Remember, they brought in Matt Canada, complete bust, handed over to Steve Ensminger last year, the tight ends coach. He goes to more of a pro style, featuring some mid-range to more vertical downfield attempts with Joe Burrow as quarterback. Again, they had a couple of stray games where they looked good, but overall LSU is not at the offensive capacity that they need to be to challenge Alabama for this division title and even the SEC championship. Now, believe it or not, Ensminger went to head coach Ed Orgeron and said, I want to change to a spread. Let's go out and find a spread guy, and I'll work with him. And that's what they did. I talked about a 29-year-old before. Now we'll talk about a 28-year-old. 28-year-old passing game coordinator this year. But Joe Brady comes from the New Orleans Saints, and he has brought the RPO game with him, which LSU is now going to incorporate into their offense. Lots of RPOs. Articles I read, Drew, there was nobody happier about this than Joe Burrow himself. Joe Burrow said he's been running an RPO system since high school. Then he went to Ohio State, where they run the power spread under Urban Meyer, but a version of RPO stuff. And he went through spring practice happy as could be that that's the direction that they're heading now. Now, for LSU, it's going to be a little different. Spring game, you're looking at 4 wide receivers. They're putting fullbacks spread out wide, all kinds of spread stuff incorporated into this offense. Now, they've always had the athletes, right? You see all their wide receivers littered across the NFL, but they're bigger NFL stars than they were LSU stars because the offense always held them back. Here, we'll see if they can bust loose. It's going to be the key to their season. Ed Orgeron, the entire offensive side of the ball is fired up to unveil this thing. They kind of kept it under wraps. I went back and watched the spring game, and they kind of kept it under wraps. They'll fully unveil it. They don't want to put too much on tape yet. Can't blame them for that. But we're going to see. That's the biggest news coming out of LSU, because the rest – I talk to you off air about every year when we do these previews that the preview of Alabama is kind of redundant. There's not much new you can say about Alabama year in and year out. And the same goes for LSU. It's kind of redundant. It's always the same thing. Strong defensively. Can they go ahead and do anything offensively? Well, this year we've got a little bit of news that may, if you want to get ahead of the curve, if you want to project that LSU is going to be able to succeed in this type of offense, then you'll be on LSU, or you'll be playing overs because LSU is going to spread the field and wing it around a little bit more. Might not be as much deep passing, because from what I read, the passing plays in this system are a lot of slants, a lot of screens. They didn't totally abandon what Ed Ogeron and Steve Ensminger put in the playbook last year. They kept that as part of their playbook and kind of meshed the two systems together here. So you can see some vertical throws downfield by Joe Burrow. Running backs are happy. They're going to catch balls out of the backfield now. And the two guys, Brady and Ensminger, the two that have to work together, seem to get along real well. Ensminger's going to call the plays, but Brady's right there for him to lean on for any information that he might need about his playbooks. It could work here, Drew. All indications. And when you come out of spring practice, everything's positive, everything's rainbows. We'll see how it goes through the summer and how it hits the field. But to me, boy, if LSU can put points on the board, they're going to be dangerous. They lost a couple of key defenders to the NFL draft. Everybody knows Devin White first round, Greedy Williams second round. But a lot of that defense comes back, and we know LSU fills their defense the way Alabama does with five-star recruits. So I'm most interested in how this offense works for LSU. I think that is the biggest story to follow with LSU this season.
Robbie, good stuff. We got Robbie Veno on the podcast breaking down the SEC West, every game in the division. And last year, guys, in college football, 5% blue chip totals. He went 11-3. That's 79% last year in his top rated totals in college football. The 4 and 5% totals, 43-25. That's 63%. Last year. No cherry picking numbers. That's for the whole year. So good stuff from Robbie Veno, and you can get his NFL and college football season right now at sportsmemo.com, and with the podcast coupon code of CFB when you're checking out, that will take $100 off the price at sportsmemo.com. If you're looking for a betting service, Robbie Veno is as good a choice as anybody. Great choice for college football, and his NFL college football season is at sportsmemo.com. The coupon code CFB at checkout will take $100 off. Robbie, we got 3 teams left. The 2 Mississippi schools up next. We'll talk about Ole Miss. The University of Mississippi went 5-7 last year, just 1-7 in conference. The sole win coming against the aforementioned Arkansas Razorbacks. Just 3-9 against the number as well. So if you were betting Ole Miss last year, you lost a ton of money. And 6-6 over under number here. How are you looking to bet the Rebels from Oxford, Mississippi, Robbie?
Yeah, they have to take 2 steps backward to go forward here, Drew. I think that, the initial, when you read or take an initial assessment of what Ole Miss brings to the 2019 campaign, your first reaction would be, that's a fade team. That's a team I want to fade. The problem with that is they might not match 3-9, the 3-9 record that they put up against the spread last year, which is great for fading. Obviously, 75% winners if you're against Ole Miss. The reason why it might not be as good is because now, the numbers that we saw last year on Ole Miss aren't going to be hung this year. Ole Miss is going to be a team that's going to be treated as maybe the basement team in the West this season. But they know that they have to make huge changes here to get better, and they did. I mean, give them credit. They went out and they got 2 former head coaches to act as coordinators this season. Rich Rodriguez, we get Rich Rod back in college football. He's the offensive coordinator. Mike McIntyre, the former Colorado State head coach, Colorado head coach, he's the defensive coordinator. Lots of changes going on here. Offensively, you move from an air raid system to Rich Rodriguez's system. Now, you might say, they're both spreads. This is why you have to define spreads, because the air raid is completely different than the spread offense that Rich Rodriguez runs, which is run heavy, and it absolutely demands that the quarterback be able to run. Remember Khalil Tate at Arizona a couple years ago for Rich Rodriguez, and how often he ran the football. And that's when Rich Rodriguez's offense is at its best, when the quarterback is a mobile running threat, when they can run power between the tackles with their running back and then throw off of that. Ole Miss has a long way to go before they're going to be that type of team. And I'll give you the quote from Rich Rodriguez himself. Rich Rodriguez said, "We have a long way to go in every position." Not only are they starting from scratch with a whole new offense, but they may be the youngest team in the SEC. I don't have the exact chart and numbers in front of me, so I'm just going off of how many freshmen are going to be expected to play here and make an impact for Ole Miss. If they're not the youngest team in the SEC, Drew, with what they put on the field, they're going to be the second youngest team in the SEC. So you get my point. It's a lot of youth. It's a lot of learning on the offensive side of the football. They're thrilled with their new quarterback, Matt Corral, redshirt freshman quarterback, who is likely to put up some huge numbers inside this system. He came through the spring, and Rich Rod had a lot of good things to say about him, both as a dual threat quarterback, both running and throwing the football. But they have to get the rest of the stuff in sync here. And they lost a lot of talent. We went through it a little bit earlier in this podcast, but how about Ole Miss lost 6 players to the draft? They've had a lot of talent here the last few years. And now with this complete overhaul of an offensive system, we'll see how that goes. I don't expect it to go great right off the bat, especially knowing that the offensive coordinator himself doesn't think that they're close to where they want to be. Defensively, Mike McIntyre comes in. He's going to overhaul their defense. Now, Ole Miss was kind of one of those 4-down lineman teams, 4-2-5, so to speak, some 4-3. But they're going to a complete 3-4 right now, and it's probably better for Mississippi. Unlike Alabama, unlike LSU, unlike Georgia, Ole Miss doesn't produce enough of those big, strong defensive linemen to go with 4 down. So they're going to go 3-4. The McIntyre scheme, if you want to liken it to something, it's the exact scheme that the Chicago Bears run, where they get pressure on the quarterback. That's what he's looking to do. They want to have their outside guys get pressure. Hopefully the secondary can feed off of that pressure and force turnovers. It worked in Colorado. Go back and check Mike McIntyre's record. The secondary, there's a lot of Colorado D-backs in the NFL right now that had a lot of success. So, what are you going to do? You're talking about 2 complete overhauls of systems and a bunch of youth running around on both sides of the ball. It can't be good for Ole Miss this year. The good news for them is that they've completed their bowl ban. If they can get the 6 wins, they're eligible this year, and they've got their scholarships back. So good recruiting class. And like I said, I give Matt Luke a lot of credit to be the head coach and go out and hire 2 ex-head coaches to help run the show for him. They both, the coordinators, I read a lot of quotes on both of these guys right now. They're saying the right things. They respect the head coach. They're not overstepping their bounds. They're just there to help bring this program back. It probably won't be this year. I'd be interested to see. I have my own power rating number in mind, but I'd be interested to see where odds makers place or price the Ole Miss Rebels this year, because there's a lot of work to do there.
Robbie, let's move from Oxford to Starkville. Talk about the Mississippi State Bulldogs. 8-5 last year, 4-4 in conference play, 8-5 against the spread. So if you were betting Mississippi State, you made some money, and just 3-9 towards the under. Big under trender for the Bulldogs. What are you thinking here for Mississippi State?
Yeah, they lost their offensive coordinator. Luke Getsy went off to be the quarterback's coach for Green Bay in January. So Joe Moorhead didn't hire anybody, just took it over himself. Joe Moorhead known for his offensive play calling. Joe Moorhead known for his offensive passing game. That's what Mississippi State lacked last year with Nick Fitzgerald at quarterback. Great runner, not an accurate thrower. They have to firm that up, and that's what he's been working on all spring long. Defensively, they lose some pieces, some pretty good pieces. I mean, Jeffrey Simmons goes first round. Montez Sweat goes first round. That's 2 huge components of their defensive line, and Jonathan Abram goes to the Oakland Raiders in the first round. So when you lose 3 first-rounders off your defense, and you're not named Alabama, you're named Mississippi State, to me that's significant. They just don't replace NFL first-rounders that easily. So we'll see if the defense doesn't have some bit of a toll taken on it by those graduation losses. Again, Moorhead at this point in time still is not pleased with where the passing game is. As far as his offense is concerned, he's really not pleased with the accuracy of his quarterback right now. So I don't know what you can expect out of them early on, Drew. We're going to have to take a little better look at summer, fall practice, see how things progress heading into the season, and maybe Mississippi State can, diversify that offense to the point where they just can't be so predictable. Remember the bowl game against Iowa. Iowa basically just shut that offense down cold. They knew what was coming, put 8 up at the line of scrimmage, and a 7-point underdog won going away in that game. That was a game where the tight end T.J. Hawkinson had a huge game for Iowa. So I think Mississippi State, to avoid being predictable, has to fix this passing game. I think last year's power rating has to come down, and they have to be priced a little cheaper than they were last year. If they're not, you have to fade this team. If they are, then you have to make your own judgment at that point. But I don't think they're going to be as good as last year. I definitely don't think they're anywhere near as big of a threat to Alabama, LSU as they were last season, unless this passing game can help out, because the defense, it's 3 important guys, Drew. They're going to miss those 3 guys on the defensive side of the football.
Robbie, one team left. We're talking with Robbie Veno at Rob Veno Sports on Twitter. I am Drew Martin at Drew Martin Bets on Twitter. Guys, reach out to us. Let us know which Power 5 conference you want us to talk next. Like to hear the comments, what you want to hear. So that's at Drew Martin Bets on Twitter or at Rob Veno Sports. Robbie, let's talk this Texas A&M Aggies, 9-4 to finish up the SEC West here. We're going in alphabetical order. They didn't finish at the basement. Actually finished 9-4, 5-3 in conference. Also 9-4 against the spread. So their straight up and ATS records were the same. And 7-6, small trender towards the over. What are you thinking here in College Station this year, Robbie?
Boy, I'm thinking of all the teams in the SEC West, this might be my favorite of all from a betting standpoint come this fall, whether it be on A&M, whether it be totals-wise. What Jimbo Fisher did in his first season, taking over the complete collapse of this team under Kevin Sumlin the year before, was outstanding. It's the second year of the system, like it is for a couple other teams in this division. Fisher, Daryl Dickey as the offensive coordinator, Mike Elko at defensive coordinator. They did a great job. I mean, somehow they turned Kellen Mond into a quarterback, Drew. And I have to tell you, I would have never thought that first game where he threw for over 400 yards, I think it was against Clemson, absolutely was mind-blowing to me that guy threw for that many yards against that defense, because we'd all seen Kellen Mond play before that, and it just wasn't really good passing. He just wasn't a really good passing quarterback, but he's developed. He's got another year under his belt. That's why Nick Starkel took off and transferred out. I think Mond and this offense, which didn't lose a heck of a lot, and they've got that entire receiving core back. Offense going to be extremely explosive. And on defense, not a lot going here either, really. And they lost 7 draft picks, but let me say this, that 5 of the 7 guys A&M lost went in the very late rounds, either round 5, 6, or 7. They didn't have first, second, third rounders leave their team. So Fisher's recruited well. He's got the system in place. The guys that are there succeeded in this system last year. They closed the season with that 7 overtime win over LSU, but it was a win over LSU. And then the final game of the year, they absolutely destroy NC State in that bowl game. Ryan Finley, now an NFL quarterback, they shut him down. They ran the ball for 400 yards in that game. Jimbo Fisher, I think, has everything in place. And with every bit as much talent that maybe he had with a lot of his Florida State squads. So I expect big things out of them. I'll probably find my way to them, like I say, either sidewise or total-wise this year. But for me, it's the team in the West that I have the biggest asterisk on. To me, Auburn could be good. LSU they could both be really good. Let me rephrase that. They could be really good Auburn. They could be really good LSU. But there's a question mark with each of those teams. Will the offense be able to, adjust to the change? With this team, I don't think there's any question marks. The offense remains the same. The defense remains the same. And, boy, they got a head of steam going right now. So I like A&M.
You're liking A&M. And, Robbie, let me ask you one last question before we wrap this up. Who do you pick to finish second in the SEC West this year?
Without going through the schedule while we're on the air, I would say I think that LSU's probably the second best team, but I might pick A&M, Drew, to be honest with you. I think that A&M has that type of capability this year. So I'll go on record here in the spring and say A&M, and then when we come back in August, I'll probably change my mind, but I like them right now.
And that's okay. You got some months before the season starts. So good stuff, Robbie. On Twitter at Rob Veno Sports. Guys, you can follow me on Twitter at Drew Martin Betts. And remember the coupon code CFB at checkout for the NFL college football full season for $100 off. That coupon code is CFB at checkout at Sportsmemo.com. Guys, thanks for tuning in. This was the SEC West Division preview for college football. The next college football podcast will be on next week, next Wednesday or Thursday. So stay tuned to sportsmemo.com for more betting information.